crossed. So fingers crossed that in the Googleverse, this hangout on air, is live. So May 22nd, Biodiversity Day, the International Day of Biological Diversity. It's already Friday in Oceania, and it's still Thursday afternoon here in the Americas. I'm Ron Motter, host of .com. Very pleased that I'm chatting with Richard McLellan over Richard, great to this hang.
Hi, Ron. It's great to be here. You're breaking up, so we're not getting a really good stream at this time, though.
Just cross, it gets better.
Okay.
Can you introduce yourself to the world?
Sure, Ron. Yeah, my name is Richard McLellan. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of a Natural Resource Management Group on the Midwest of Australia. We're called the Northern Agricultural Catchments Council, and we work with communities and agencies and individuals to get land and sea stewardship in that part of the world.
Okay.
Ron, I'm not getting your voice coming through.
Better. The organization that you're working for, is that called NAC? N-A-C-C?
Exactly, yeah. So it's called NAC, but really it works right across biodiversity, sustainable agriculture, sustainable marine and oceans and coasts work, as well as climate change and Indigenous. So it's very much around sustainable development, which is the theme for this year's International Biodiversity Day.
All right, how would you break it down? How explain to the folks what is biodiversity?
Well, to me, it's everything. You know, it's the basis upon which everything that we enjoy in terms of humanity and well-being is dependent upon. In the strictest sense of the word, obviously, it is the biological diversity, the genetic diversity of all the species and ecosystems and such around the world. But in reality, we're here because we are part of biodiversity. We are a species in that web of life, and then all of our well-being, our food security, our clothing, our medicine, everything is dependent upon the biodiversity around the world.
Okay, so is simply all of the flora and fauna on this planet?
Exactly, yeah. It's you break it down, I think it is a lot of species that you can't even see. They're microorganisms and bacteria and things in the soil, right through to all of the charismatic megafauna, the pandas and lions and cheetahs of the world as well.
In our conversations on Mondays, we've been talking to some friends in South Africa who have been saying that instead of talking about the big five, they want to talk about the big 50,000 and put a focus on the small.
That's an interesting point. A good colleague of mine from the Department of Parks and Wildlife in Australia used to always say, in return, in terms of Southwest Australia, he'd say, well, Africa might well have the big five, but we've got the little 12 down here. And he was referring in particular to a fantastic suite of small mammals that are endemic in Southwest Australia, things like the numbat and the like, and they are really fantastic species that are very little known even outside Western Australia, probably even within Western Australia.
And you're calling those the little 12?
Yeah, yes, Kieran used to call them the little 12, yes.
Okay. We were chatting quite a bit through Twitter. This is actually our very first vocal chat. But we were chatting a bit on Twitter back in November for the World Parks Congress. Can you tell us a little bit about that event and your involvement there?
Sure. I think from my perspective, I was attending the World Parks Congress, having just recently, at the time I was working with WWF, the World Wildlife Fund, and we had just recently released the 2014 edition of the Living Planet Report, which was very much about sustainable development, again, the theme for this World Biodiversity Day. But one of the basic elements of that report, in terms of the solution section, was about the importance of protecting our natural capital, of protecting biodiversity through designated protected areas, whether they are government-funded or government-supported mainstream public protected areas, or whether they are through private protected areas on private land throughout the world. Both have a critical role in terms of just making sure that the natural capital that, as I was saying earlier, that we depend upon for food security and sustainable food, water, and energy systems around the world is properly protected in the first place.
For setting us on the path that we need to be on.
Sorry, Ron, I didn't catch that.
I said, and in terms of an event, do you think it was successful in capitalizing action and making people aware?
Definitely. I think it was a huge event in Sydney with a large attendance, a fantastic schedule of speakers and presentations, and I know that the presentation that I gave on the Living Planet Report and the importance of protected areas to our sustainable future was certainly well received. But there was a smorgasbord of presentations and topics at the Congress, and everyone who I spoke to felt that it had been a very, very successful event.
Beautiful, beautiful. You're on the opposite side of Australia right now. Can you paint us a picture of conservation and biodiversity conservation in Western Australia?
Sure, Ron. I think we're in Western Australia, but more particularly we're in Southwest Australia, and that is where the capital city, Perth, is located, on the western edge of the continent, facing the Indian Ocean across towards South Africa. Southwest Australia is one of the original 25 global biodiversity hotspots that were designated a number of years ago primarily by CI. But it's an amazing part of the world, but it's also an incredibly threatened part of the world. It's most of the vegetation in Southwest Australia has been cleared for agriculture. Some of the vegetation communities are down to just 1 or 3% of their original extent, and so there's some real challenge. But at the same time, it is a biodiversity hotspot, partly because it is so threatened, but partly also because it has such high biological diversity, especially in the plant kingdom. And two very exciting things are happening right now in Southwest Australia, Ron. One is the quongan, as we call it, which is the equivalent to fynbos, or it's a low Mediterranean shrubland and heath vegetation community, extremely high in terms of biodiversity, alpha and beta diversity, and it is incredibly threatened. Most of it has been cleared, but currently there's a push by Professor Hans Lambers from the University of Western Australia, who is nominating the quongan community as a World Heritage Area listing with UNESCO. And so that is a really exciting development, and we're hoping that will progress through and be successful. And the second exciting thing happening right now is a nomination for the woodlands, the tall eucalypt woodlands of the West Australian wheat belt, to be nominated under the EPBC Act, which is the Australian Commonwealth Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act, to give those communities also far better protection than they have had in the past. And some of those wheat belt woodlands, as I mentioned earlier, around about 97% of those of some of those woodland communities have been completely cleared away.
Now, one of the things that I find interesting from Australian media, and particularly the ABC, programs that talk about Australia's biodiversity and wilderness and conservation, and I'm thinking in particular one program called Off Track. But where do you go, or where do you recommend that visitors go if they'd like to know more about conservation issues in Australia? Can you think of any other radio or TV programs or magazines? You know, what are the resources we should be using to acquaint ourselves with the issues?
Well, I tend to go to Twitter, Ron, as you know. I think if you were to follow some of the leading ecologists and agencies on Twitter, you will find that you will have invitations and exposure to a huge range of Australian biodiversity. I tend to look at the work that's been done in the arid zone in particular right now, for example, on dingo conservation. You can see issues popping up in terms of leadbeater's possum conservation in the tall forests in Victoria. We talked earlier about some of the issues around the Australia with logging, for example, in Tasmania, or the Great Barrier Reef in Queensland. All of these I follow through Twitter. I don't tend to watch TV so much. I more read what people are talking, see the photographs they're posting, watch the YouTube videos that are going up, and then read journal articles and such that they are also posting.
I hear you. Good. Well, from one Twitter fan to another, great to hear that. The question is an abundance of information, but you have to find out, you know, you have to figure out this. Going back to the International Day of Biological Diversity, outside of the people in your office and your professional colleagues, are any people talking about the International Day of Biological Diversity?
No, and unfortunately not. And that was when I made the comment earlier. We have the little 12 here in Southwest Australia, but I would imagine that most of the population wouldn't know that we have a little 12 or what they are. And I think that is one of the interesting factors, is that we are absolutely committed to biodiversity and biological conservation. And yet a lot of our general public still haven't got that understanding or appreciation, awareness, or call to action, if you like. And so, interesting enough, I'm going to a conference today in just out of Perth. It's for the West Australian Landcare Network Forum, and it is looking at how do we address this issue, how do we revitalise the land care in Western Australia. But how do we, in more broad terms, how do we ensure that everyday people, whether they are farmers or fishermen or just commuters going to work, have a better understanding of our biodiversity, of our conservation issues, and how they can play a role in looking after those on farms or on beaches or on the highway even.
No, that makes all good sense. It's a matter, the question is how do we, what's a jargony word, you know, how do we mainstream the conversation about biodiversity?
We think, I work for the Northern Agricultural Catchments Council, and we're based in Midwest Australia, as I said, Ron, and we spend a lot of energy on community outreach, working with the general public in our area. Whether they are, once again, farmers or urban dwellers or people with holiday homes on the beach, and just trying to educate them about some of the issues and the importance of biodiversity in this part of the world, and what they can do in terms of action to make a contribution to its future.
You know, I was really impressed looking at the NAC website. You know, you have a whole section dedicated to the specific projects for biodiversity. And often you don't see that explicitly. You know, either biodiversity is abstractly described, but rarely are the projects kind of identified and labeled under, and identified under that umbrella of biodiversity. I mean, you have some very interesting projects there.
Absolutely. I think, as I said earlier, we are very much focused on working with the community. And so if you look at one of probably our flagship project in the biodiversity thematic area is something we call Hidden Treasures. And it really picks up on that theme I was mentioning earlier, that so much of this part of the world has been cleared for agriculture and development. But on those farms, you can find some amazing small remnants of biodiversity, some habitat, and then huge amounts of flora biodiversity and fauna. And it's quite an exciting thing to work with farmers and to protect these small patches of bush, and then to work collectively to see if we can not only protect them, but maybe set up some connectivity and better management and restoration of some of the gaps between these remnants.
Will you or will any of your colleagues be attending the World Heritage meetings that will take place this summer in Germany?
No, no one from I won't be going, Ron, and no one from my organisation.
Because
are you attending?
No, I certainly am not going in person, but I certainly want to pay attention. And going back to the topic of Great Barrier Reef, that certainly is in the news and the headlines, and will be for some time. And last year, I certainly just loved watching the World Heritage Proceedings meetings when they addressed the Great Barrier Reef. And it was at that time, was it you or was it someone else from World Wildlife Australia? The statements made by WWF Australia were quite piercing.
No, very, very much so. I know that WWF Australia and Dermot O'Gorman, the CEO, are very, very keen to make sure that everything is done to protect the Great Barrier Reef. WWF has been working on the Great Barrier Reef for decades, and not just on the reef, but working with farmers once again up through North Queensland to try to minimise the amount of nutrient runoff and the like that would get onto the near-shore waters and therefore onto the reef. And so it's been a very an issue very close to the heart of WWF Australia, and hence there have been some very strong statements about it being better managed and better protected, and the potential impacts and the potential World Heritage Area values that they want to see protected.
I hear you. Hey, before we go, and I really thank you for your time, and we've had some unfortunate technical glitches today, so we'll try this again, hopefully with greater success. But before we go, I am very thankful that you edited the Living Planet report, and I want a behind-the-scenes look at it. What did it take to compile that report, and what were the immediate reactions to that? I mean, I thought that was personally, I thought that was one of the better reports of the past decade. So thank you very much for doing that.
Well, thank you very much, Ron. I think that was my third Living Planet report, and yes, I agree. I think it was easily the best Living Planet report that's ever been produced since the first one in 1998. So 10 editions now, and it was very, very well received upon publication, and as usual got a huge amount of exposure and created a huge amount of discussion around the world, which is primarily what it is intended to do, to be a bit of a door opener, a catalyst for the dialogue that we want to have about sustainable development and what needs to be done, and the condition of the planet in terms of biodiversity through the Living Planet Index and humanity's footprint through the ecological footprint. But I think it's a huge effort to produce a book, as you can imagine, Ron. Virtually as soon as you've finished one edition, within a few months you're starting to work on the next edition. And the last 12 months prior to publication is a flurry. I think there was something like 80 contributors, but about 120 people involved in writing and editing and reviewing and contributing images or whatever for the publication. So a huge effort, and I was very proud to be the editor-in-chief of that, and had a very good team that I was working with across the world to produce a very, very good product. Thank you very much for the praise.
Well, it's well deserved. Richard, I want to end the hangout here. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we sign off this webcast?
No, just congratulations to you, Ron. I think that the effort that you're putting into trying to promote your work with the IUCN in particular, but also with things like World Parks Congress and International Biodiversity Day, is a big step between awareness and action. But without awareness, you won't get the action. So it's a really important role that you're playing, and I'm honoured to have been invited into your hangout today and to talk to you about International Biodiversity Day.
Thank you very much, and what a pleasure chatting with you. This conversation will continue. Cheers.
Okay.